So we finally got a Gene scene and not just one. This whole episode took us to Omaha, Nebraska and provided some much needed comedic relief after the total brutality of the last three episodes. And it also resolved the Jeff issue. Or did it? For me, this episode raised the question about Gene's state of mind. And we see him put on Marco's ring. He harnesses some of his slip and powers, and he devises this mall heist out of self-preservation. But what self is he preserving? Does he derive any pleasure out of the scheme? So at the end, and we'll talk about this, we see that SG was here. With Jeff neutralized, he can go back to his quiet, boring Gene life. But does he want to? Can he? So maybe this is just the eye of the storm before we get walloped by those final three episodes. With three episodes left, there's plenty of story left to tell. And case in point, just remember the last three episodes of Breaking Bad. Ozymandias, Granite State, and Felina. They can do a heck of a lot in three episodes. I think he has to be faced with at least one more hurdle or dilemma. And it's probably going to be more serious than what we've already seen. Seems like, this was a fairly easy problem to overcome with Jeff. So I mentioned in my last breakdown that I thought the final four episodes, including this one, would be all about Jimmy having to come to terms with who he really is and really grapple with that identity. And I think this episode sets that up nicely. All right, I have a lot to say about this episode. I say that every time, but let's go ahead and get into it. So, hi, I'm Courtney. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Make sure you give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. All right, let's get right into it. So I actually want to begin by looking at the title sequence. So as you may have noticed, or maybe you heard or read about it, the title sequences with each season have degraded over time. So they have lost color. It looks like they've been taped over many times. And in this season, it is the most degraded we've seen. It's almost entirely in black and white. And even going back to Wine and Roses, which was season 6, episode 1, you see a little flash of blue, and that's a little tracking image that pops up where there's a gap in the recording. And then in this episode, I don't know about you all, but when I was watching it, I got actual chills. And the way the recording just stops was jarring. And speaking of Wine and Roses, I actually want to go back to remind you about this scene. So Kim and Jimmy are going to go to the courthouse. They hail a cab. And before they get in the cab, you see Kim toss out Jimmy's world's second best lawyer, again, mug. And later in that episode, that's when we see them meet at El Camino. It's also when they first start devising the actual Howard scheme. That's when Kim proposes that perhaps they go after Cliff Main first, and then we see them head over to the country club. But it's also the beginnings of the Saul Goodman persona. Now, of course, Saul Goodman is the name that Jimmy already adopted. It was the name that he was operating under. So he's already been practicing under the name, but this is where the persona is really, really conceived. In that same restaurant scene in El Camino, and Kim says, Saul Goodman would drive an American-made car. Saul Goodman would have an office. So this conception of Saul Goodman is really, really coming to fruition at this moment. So taken in this context and revisiting the scene where the mug gets thrown out, that was Jimmy's mug. This is the birth of Saul Goodman and the end of Jimmy McGill. And then in episode 9, Fun and Games, we finally see Saul Goodman from the Breaking Bad era, and we get the shot of his world's greatest lawyer mug on his desk. And that's because Saul Goodman is the world's greatest lawyer. He's not second best to anyone. That's part of the, the bravado, the narcissism of that character. And also because Kim is no longer a lawyer, that promotes Jimmy. So going back to the title sequence of this episode. So you may have noticed that for every episode, they have like a different sequence of images. So like there's the tarantula with the tie, there's the hand flicking the cigarette ash, and then there's this one, the mug falling and breaking. And I think this is significant that the mug falls and breaks in this episode. And the world's greatest mug breaking is perhaps the end of Saul. And this is Jean's episode. We are in Jean's world here. And then we see after the mug starts to fall, we see that the tape has been stopped. We see how it's a stop in the upper left-hand corner, and then there's a beat, and then it starts to record again. So this is perhaps signaling that the end of the story is near, but there's more to tell, and there's a new image being recorded over what previously exists. So there's a new version of this character that we have yet to see and we are going to see. And is this iteration going to be more Jimmy-like, more Saul-like? We will have to wait and see. But the way that another point I wanted to mention before moving on is the way that the images come through in this title sequence is sort of ghost-like. You know, you get this trace of what came before, these images that have been taped over, degraded. So it's not fully erased, but it's ghost-like until we get to the end here where it is being stopped and then recorded over. So someone pointed out that, you know, in the previous seasons, we've only had 10 episodes. So they have 10 different title sequences. And this is our 10th episode. So I'm really curious to see what the title sequences for the final 3 are going to be. I expect it to be something we have not yet seen before, and really excited to see it. But the idea of ghost-like images, I think, comes up again later in this episode when Jean is talking to Frank, trying to stall him. And I'll come to that later when we get to it, but just keep that in mind. This idea of the specter of Saul Goodman, of Jimmy, lurking just beneath the surface. So I take this title sequence and all the images we get of garbage and dumpsters throughout this season to be symbolic of death and then also rebirth, right? So if the world's second best lawyer mug being thrown away is the end of Jimmy, and then the world's greatest lawyer falling is the end of Saul, what is perhaps the end of Jean? So we see him take out a lot of garbage in this episode. So both literally and perhaps metaphorically, right? So like he's trying to handle the Jeff situation, and that's in a way taking out the garbage. So I have a lot more to say about that, but I want to go now to talk about the cold open and the introduction to Carol Burnett's character, Marion. So we open up in a grocery store and we see Marion, who is in a little scooter with her little grabber, reaching for a can of condensed milk, and a gentleman asks her if she needs assistance, which she says no, and if she needed help, she would ask for it. So right off the bat, we get the sense that this is a very independent woman, right? So at first glance, she might seem like she's vulnerable, maybe disabled, but that's not the personality that she projects at all. She then rolls up to the deli counter, and she's chatting a little bit with the butcher, and as she orders her pastrami, she scolds him for, you know, overshooting last time and giving her more than what she asked for. So a line that I think is really interesting is when he asks how she's doing, and she says, well, the brain is still working. So we get the sense that Marion is sharp, and then she tries some Schnell's Farm, which of course is a nod to writer, director, producer Thomas Schnell's, and she says, sharp, huh? You know, or very sharp. And I think that's perhaps a clue to how we should be reading Marion. She herself is very sharp, and appearances aren't always what they seem to be. So as she's heading back home, she gets stopped by a drift of snow that is blocking the sidewalk, and we then learn the title of the episode is Nippy. And there we see Gene stapling up lost flyers for his dog Nippy. He asks if he can help her, give her a little push, and she declines, and then they start talking about Nippy. And Jimmy has a way with old people, as we've been told, right? Old people love Jimmy, and so he finally persuades her to let him give her a push, and then he snips the wire, and ends up, having to give her a push all the way home. So he's brought down her defenses, right? So like we get the sense that this is not someone that likes to accept help, doesn't want to accept help. She likes doing things for herself. She's fiercely independent. And here she's relying on the kindness of this stranger who disarms her with a story about his sad little puppy dog that got away. And before I start talking about the next scene in the house, I just wanted to also mention that when I forgot to mention earlier, that when she gets stopped by the drift of snow, she remarks that it wasn't like this before. So when she was presumably en route to the grocery store, there was no snow there. And obviously, there wasn't snowfall while she was in the grocery store for that short period of time. So Marion is sharp, right? Like maybe she doesn't put it all together right at this moment, but and I'll talk more about this later about where I think this might be headed, but I'll just say this. I don't think Marion is like the sweet, vulnerable woman that she projects. And in fact, in some ways she reminded me a lot of Kim, this sort of I do it myself attitude, I save myself sort of mentality. Maybe that speaks to perhaps like the Nebraskan mindset. I've never been to Nebraska, don't really know what the people are like there, but there's certainly some similarities between those two characters. I don't know if anyone else felt that way. So back at the house, we get the reveal of who Marion really is, and that she is Jeff, the cab driver's mother. And so he comes in, and much to his surprise, he finds Jean sitting at the table with his mother. They're drinking. So again, like as with every other title so far this season, the blank and blanks, which have come to an end, and in my point of view, and I wrote this as a comment in my last video because I forgot to mention it. I think the blank and blank was a nod to Jimmy and Kim, and now that relationship has been severed, it's ended. There's no more and. But like the previous episodes this season, Nippy has more than one meaning, right? So Nippy means cold. It's nippy out, put a sweater on. And Nippy, of course, is the name of the fictional Pomeranian that Jimmy uses to gain Marion's trust. And also, you can take a nip of alcohol, as we see them doing here at the kitchen table. So Jeff comes in, and he's obviously alarmed to see Jimmy sitting at the table with his mom, and then we get this in the oven shot of Jimmy pulling something out of the oven. And we get a couple more of these oven shots later with the Cinnabon montage. And I take this to mean that Jimmy is cooking something up. He's cooking up a scheme here. And Marion very gleefully tells Jeff that she invited Jimmy to stay for dinner. So after dinner, we cut outside and we see Jimmy I keep calling him Jimmy. So after dinner, we see Jean and Jeff taking the garbage out. So again, more garbage imagery here. And so Jean confronts him and tells him that he knows what he wants. He really wants to get into the game. Otherwise, he would have already turned him in. And this idea of the game, right, getting in the game and gameplay is one that's thematic throughout this episode. So like with all the references to football and even the way that Jimmy constructs the scheme is very much like coming up with a football play. Like he even has his little playbook where he draws the actual play of what Jeff will do once he's in the department store. And we also see that Gene himself is studying up on the game of football, right? So in order to ingratiate himself with Frank, the security guard, and earn his trust, he figures out that this guy really loves Huskers football, and in their first meeting, he doesn't know anything about the game, so he studies up. He gets the paper, he learns the scores, and obviously he does some research even further back. So he learns the history of the team, so that way he can impress Frank and have something to talk about with him. And Frank even remarks at one point, "What a memory you have!" And kind of catches him a little bit off guard, and he's like, oh well, I can't remember what I ate for dinner last night, and trying to not seem like he's putting him on, or trying to quell any suspicions that Frank may have. While Jimmy while Gene is teaching Jeff the game, he himself is learning the game. And while he's training Jeff on how to navigate through the department store, it's like a football drill, and he comes up with this rhyme scheme that we heard in one of the teasers. And many people have already pointed out that this might be homage to the film The Dirty Dozen. So the rhyme scheme is a device to help Jeff keep focus and remember how many items he's supposed to get, and get all the items that he needs in that short 3-minute window that he has. Now, to backtrack just a little bit. So right after Gene has dinner with Marion and Jeff, he goes back to his house. He makes himself a rusty nail. And like we've seen him do before, he turns on his police scanner, perhaps waiting to see if Jeff is going to rat on him. And then he goes to his little shoebox and he recovers Marco's ring. Now, Marco's ring is like Jimmy's talisman. Like he puts that on, he fingers it, and it's like it gives him his magic. It gives him his mojo, right? His slip-in mojo. And it's kind of like Kim's Zafiro Angejo stopper. It's sort of the same sort of thing, or Walter White's pork pie hats, right? So these objects that confer a certain amount of power or magic to these characters. And so he puts on the ring, and then he does something interesting, right? He goes and he shuts off the police scanner. It's as though, like, with the ring on, he throws, not that he throws caution to the wind, but he's got more confidence. And I wanted to also speak about the montage that we see where he gets his swagger back. We start to see some of that old magic, that old spark that is Jimmy, that is Saul. And before making this breakdown, I actually went back and I watched all of the Gene scenes from the season premieres of the previous seasons. Now, Breaking Bad, and I think probably some other YouTubers put up videos with some clips to remind us, and that was helpful. But actually going back and watching the scenes in full was really helpful, just to remind myself of where we are with Gene. And just as a reminder, in the season premiere to season 2 in Switch, and then in the season premiere to season 3 in Mabel, and then for 4 and 5 as well, it is continuous, right? Like, so there's not a lot of gap or time passage in the Gene timeline. And that's evidenced by the fact that we see the book, The Moon's a Balloon, a memoir by David Nevin. And we see that he's still holding that book, still reading that book. And the events of fainting and going to the hospital and being picked up by Jeff, it all seems to have happened in a very short period of time, right? So we're kind of picking up right where we left off. The opening sequence to season 2 Switch is when we see him get locked out by the dumpster, and that's when he carves SG was here on the wall. And then in the season premiere to season 3 Mabel is where we first meet Nick. And in that scene, we see that's when he's taking his lunch, he's reading his book, and that's when the kid that's tried to steal the CDs hides in the photo booth. And when the security guard walks by with the police officer, we learn that's Nick. And it's the same actor, of course, that we see in this episode. And actually, they do mention his name in that earlier scene, Nick. So I wonder if anybody would have been upset if they recast Nick. I jest. I think Pat Healy is fantastic, by the way. He's wonderful in this role. And it's unfortunate that they had to recast Jeff, but it is what it is. Anyway, that aside, we see when Gene directs them to the photo booth that a little bit of Saul Goodman or Jimmy slips out, and he yells to the kid to get a lawyer. Don't say anything, get a lawyer. And then he goes back to work, and perhaps the stress of that, the stress of perhaps revealing himself, betraying himself, he faints. So here it's really interesting to see that with the level of anxiety that we've previously seen with Gene, to see him have a little bit of his swagger back, he's got some more pep in his step, he's feeling his oats again, is really interesting. And the song that's playing over this montage is by an artist named Lalo Schifrin, yes, Lalo, and it's called Jim's on the Move, and it's from Mission Impossible. So this is like Gene's own little Mission Impossible, trying to pull this heist. And it's kind of reminded me a little bit of the train heist. Of course, it's nothing to that sort of scale, but the idea that they'll be able to rob the mall and the mall won't ever know that they got robbed. I mean, eventually they'll maybe figure it out once they do inventory and see that they're missing all this merchandise. But as Gene explains to Jeff, they tape over the footage every 72 hours. So the idea of taping over the footage, again, also kind of a little bit of a callback maybe to that title sequence where we're seeing that there's something new being recorded. So the image is being erased, something new will take its place. So after the montage, and we see how Gene has established this relationship and this routine with his security guard friends over a period of time, we also get a very clear timeline set up for us based on the fact that it is fall, right? And it's about October 2010 based on some of the games that they're speaking about. Also, we get this other visual clue of timing. When Gene is walking through the mall, you see this sign that says fall clearance sale or sweater sale, whatever it says, and it says the 1st through the 7th. And I take that to mean November. So that sale will take place the 1st through the 7th since they're advertising it. So I think we're perhaps at the end of October. And if you'll recall, the opening to Quite a Ride, we know that something important is going to happen on November 12th. There will be a phone call at 3 p.m. on Jimmy's birthday. So with the logistics all figured out, the last thing to do is to get Jeff into the department store and also a way for them to transport their stolen goods. So as we see, they sneak him in the crate. And the scene with Kathy, when Gene pretends to be Steve and calls her, and then at the end we get the little Showtime motion, is a callback, of course, to earlier scene where Jimmy goes, "It's showtime," sort of pumping himself up. And when he's upstairs with Frank and he texts Jeff, "Go," it reminds me so much of the scene with Kim in Hit and Run when they're doing their Wendy scheme on Howard. So Kim is having lunch with Cliff as a distraction while Jimmy steals Howard's car and is going to pull up in front of the restaurant. And Kim texts him go at the moment that she wants him to pull up in front. So Jimmy's taking a page out of his old Kim scheme book. So in a sort of Coen Brothers-esque kind of turn of events, of course, Jeff slips and falls on the area that had been buffed, and we saw Kathy earlier ask one of her employees, to get maintenance up to buff out a scuff mark. And of course, as Jeff is running, he eats it, right? So Gene has timed the amount of time it takes Frank to eat a Cinnabon to somewhere between like 3 minutes and 12 seconds and 3 minutes and 18 seconds. So it's a good bet that he's got a solid 3 minutes. So this is precise. And as the 3 minutes comes up, Jeff is still unconscious, knocked out cold. So Gene has to stall him. So he starts to pretend to cry, and one of the more tense but also funnier and sad scenes, sad because Gene is actually telling the truth here. He reveals that he has no one. He has no parents, they're deceased. His brother is dead. No kids, no wife, no one. It wouldn't matter if he died. And this scene reminded me of so many different things. So I mentioned the Coen brothers, and if you've ever seen A Serious Man, there's a scene where the main character, Larry Gopnik, is sitting by a pool at this like really, really shoddy rundown motel called the Jolly Roger with his brother Arthur, who's having a meltdown, saying something very similar to what Jean is saying here. I have nothing, I have no family. Hashem hasn't given me anything. And so it reminded me very much of that scene. But it also reminded me of how Walt plants the bug in Hank's office, and he goes in there and he starts crying about how Skylar doesn't love him anymore and blah, 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 blah. And so Hank, not knowing what to do, is like, oh, I'll get you some coffee. But beyond, obviously, the line that he has nothing and no one, and it wouldn't matter if he died, I thought this line was really, really interesting.
Jean who? Poof! I'd be gone. I'd be... a ghost. Less than a ghost, I'd be a shadow. It'd just be nothing.
At the beginning, when I was talking about the title sequence and how like the image was almost like a ghost or like a trace, I told you guys to remember that. And when I was watching this scene where he says that, you know, I'd be a ghost, I'd be a shadow, I'd be nothing, it made me think again of that title sequence and how perhaps Jimmy, Jean, Saul, whoever is perhaps going to start thinking about his legacy and what it means, and what would it mean if he died. He is nothing, he's no one. And again, sort of reminds me of Walter White when he's hiding up in New Hampshire and he's telling Ed, you know, one day you're going to come up here and you're going to find me dead. And for men like Walt, like Jimmy, that is horrible for them, right? For people that are so charismatic and out there, and ego is such a huge part of it. The idea of fading into nothingness is a hard pill to swallow. So yeah, Jimmy would be he would be like Nippy, just a nothing, which would be awful. So anyway, they get away with it, right? He's able to stall Frank enough and hold his attention so that Jeff can hide in the bathroom until the next morning when the mall opens and he gets out, and then Ricky comes back with the truck and is able to take the goods. So back at their house, back at Jeff and Marion, it's really Marion's house, we see them going through their loot, and Gene says to them, you know, we're done. And he lets them know how he's, you know, how it's mutually assured destruction if they rat on him because they've committed all these offenses. And once he gets them to say, yes, we're done, we hear Marion coming up saying, oh, Gene, you know, I see your car. And so she comes up and she has him come into the kitchen to talk to her and everything. And I think it's significant because it's for the first time we see her standing. And, you know, prior to this scene, we've only seen her in her scooter. And even though she's fiercely independent, you know, she needs Jean to help push her back to the house. So here we can see that she's able to stand on her own a little bit. And so she's talking to him, and she shares what I think it's an interesting line, that Jimmy's or Jean is a good influence on her boy, and that he ran into some trouble back in Albuquerque. And Jean lies and says, oh, I've never been, and she throws a towel at him. And I think it's more than a throwaway line. And so then she says, where's my brain at? And then she's like, I've been meaning to ask you about Nippy. And she catches Gene off guard, and he's like, oh yeah, well, it turns out he was down the street the whole time. Some family had him. And I think the line about the brain, though, is an interesting sort of bookending. So one of the first things we hear Marion say in the grocery store, if you'll remember, when she's talking to the butcher, is that, you know, he asks how she's doing, and she says, can't complain, you know, the brain is still working. And now here she's playing this, I think it's a little bit of an act. Where's my brain at? You know, as if she was forgetful. I don't buy it. I really don't. So I think I definitely don't think this is the end of this storyline. So it certainly seems like it was wrapped up with a neat little bow that the Jeff problem is taken care of. I don't think so. So obviously, Jeff isn't as worthy of an opponent as we perhaps thought he would be, based on their interactions in earlier seasons. Certainly, Jeff seemed more menacing, like in season 4 and season 5. So, but that threat has been neutralized. But what about Marion? Maybe Marion is going to be like the Jane in the situation, right? So like where she threatens to blow things up. And I mean, hopefully, I can't imagine Jean watching Marion choke to death on her own vomit, but she could present a problem, an unforeseen sort of hurdle for Jean in the future. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about in this breakdown is the final shot where we see Gene is back at work and he's reinvigorated, right? So like he seems happy, he seems much lighter. It's the happiest we've ever seen Gene. And so you think that maybe it's because like he doesn't have the threat of Jeff looming over him anymore. He's been able to take care of it, but I think it's more than that. I think it's returning to himself, right? So like and the debate of whether he's really Saul or Jimmy is whatever. I think Saul was an exaggeration and a lot of it was an act and a mask, but he was always slipping Jimmy, right? Like his scheming is like his lifeblood. And so there's joy in that for him. So at the end, one of the employees has to remind him to take his lunch. And so instead of going up the escalator to go sit on a bench and eat a sandwich by himself and read his, he instead goes to the area of the department store where Jeff was able to pick off all of the expensive clothing items. And something catches his eye. So he goes over and he puts together a shirt and tie combination that, even though it's in black and white, like the loudness of it, the ostentatiousness of it comes through loud and clear. So he puts that together and he holds it up to his chest and he looks in the mirror and he smiles, but then he thinks better of it and he puts it down. But instead of taking it apart and putting the individual pieces back, he puts the whole thing together at the end. And it's like leaving his mark. And the way I read that, it's like another way of inscribing SG was here. So it's just another way of him saying, I exist, I was here. And it's a bolder step, a bolder move forward. So I'm really excited to see where this is going next. As I already said, I don't think this is the end of this particular storyline. I think there's more to come with Jeff and possibly Marion in the future. And I think we might see some more sort of Jean or Saul come out. Or maybe he'll throw in the towel that was thrown at him. Maybe he'll throw it back in. We'll just have to wait and see. All right. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you drop them below. Make sure you give me a thumbs up. And if you're not yet subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And before I go, I don't know if any of you out there tried to call the number that was listed on the missing flyer for Nippy. I did, and I wanted to share it with you guys now. So hang around if you want to see that. Otherwise, I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye.
Hi, you've reached Gene Takovic. If you're calling this number, you may have come across my flyer, or better yet, a very friendly fluff ball named Nippy. He's a Pomeranian, 4 years old on Halloween, light brown with a big white chest and little white paws. Oh, 6 pounds. Oh, 7 after having his way with the peanut butter jar. He was last seen on Clementine and South 35th, probably going after an alley cat or a squeaky ball. Bad diet. He warms up fast, especially if you have a TREAT. When he gets excited, he makes these tiny snorting noises, almost like a sneeze. At the end of the day, he's a cuddle bug who loves to snuggle on the couch underneath his favorite blankie. Breaks my heart to think sweet Nippy wandering the streets, hungry and cold. If you have any leads, any at all, keep there at the beach and spread the word if you can. Nippy and I would be forever grateful.